This video is sponsored by Ridge Wallets.
The latest video game craze to sweep the United States and...
Games don't get older, they get better.
Oh, it's killer graphics.
It marks a new era in gaming with lifelike graphics.
From 3D to the HD era. Now, of course, the HD era is about high-definition graphics. There's been a lot of discussion recently about when the next generation of video games begins. It begins right now, and you just saw it with your very own eyes.
Video game graphics can look like anything. They can be stylized, or they can be realistic. The graphics in a video game give it a unique, recognizable style whose look and feel live on in our minds and hearts for generations. The art styles, the lighting, the models, they all work together to build each scene in every video game. These graphics have a heavy responsibility to make a connection to the player, to bring wonder and awe when you're looking out over a beautiful hilltop in Red Dead 2, or to elicit emotional reactions during heavy moments in The Last of Us. If the graphics fail in these moments, the developer has missed a crucial opportunity in creating that moment. Imagine a future where video game graphics are indistinguishable from the real world, where you can't tell the difference between body camera footage and first-person mode in a game like GTA. A year ago, the gaming industry was shocked to see a trailer for a video game in development called Unrecord. It featured gameplay that looked too good to be a video game. The animations, the camera effects, and the graphics all looked too good to be true. The developers had to respond with proof that it was, in fact, a game running in Unreal Engine. A game that looks like our real world would achieve unparalleled immersion. The player would not have to suspend their disbelief to accept what's on screen. Even modders are taking the challenge into their own hands. Cyberpunk 2077 can look nearly indistinguishable from the real world with a few mods. Today's graphics have seemingly plateaued. We've hit a bottleneck. Technologies like nanite, ray tracing, Gaussian splatting, and more all have the power to change everything, but have yet to be utilized to their full potential. The console-selling exclusive, Halo Infinite, was mocked for its awful graphics. The PlayStation 5 exclusive, Spider-Man 2, looked amazing, yet it still looked pretty similar to its predecessor, Spider-Man 1, 5 years earlier. This in spite of benefiting from a console generation leap. To compare, this is Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro on the PlayStation 1, and only 3 years later on the PlayStation 2, this is Spider-Man 2, the movie game. On top of all of this, while today's graphics are plateauing, gameplay seems to be regressing. Graphics have steadily plateaued over the years, and gamers are content with the way things are. Companies have capitalized on the opportunity to sell our nostalgia back to us, and to give new gamers access to the games we grew up with. Remasters and remakes are commonplace now, for better or worse. In the case of GTA the Definitive Edition, the worse. So how do we go from this to this? More importantly, what's next? Why has the industry also seemed to have stagnated simultaneously? While Lara Croft is one side of the story, we also went from this to this. To understand what's next for video game graphics, we have to know where we are now on the timeline. We have to know a little bit about the technologies behind these games. We need to dive into the developer's mind at times to see what elements they consider when creating the systems that visualize the worlds we love to play in. We'll look at these aspects of video game graphics. We'll break down the multitude of layers that build a scene, from the worst looking video games to the best looking ones. We'll consider art style versus realism, like would you even want a hyper-realistic Mario? We, as gamers, have always appreciated the advancements of realistic graphics. We love to see how each year, game after game, looks better and better, more detailed than the last. But where will this lead? Is there an end in sight? If we are to reach photorealism in gaming in the next few years, what will that look like? Not in-game, but what will the effects of that on our real world look like? Let's look at some of the world's best graphics and highlight the elements that make them stand out. These are the things that can stop you dead in your tracks and just look in awe at the game world that you're playing in. The environment of the game world is a bounding box for which everything you see and encounter exists. But it's not just a container, it's the biggest piece of the illusion. The world's clock may be frozen, or it may run, causing the world around you to shift from day to night. The sky may be clear, or it may rain and thunder. Water can flow and spray, wind can blow, and vegetation can fill the screen. All of these elements work together to build a realistic environment. In Red Dead 2, the sun comes and goes. The moonlight fills the world at night. In GTA, the city lights turn on as the sun drifts down. The change is not sudden, but gradual. In most games like this, the game world adapts to the changes of its environment. In Watch Dogs, the entire city's power grid can be momentarily shut off, and the city can be plunged into total darkness. In Zelda Breath of the Wild, the towns take on new life in the night. In these games, the world slowly shifts into a new state, giving two different personalities to the same place, all depending on what time it is. These day and night cycles are typically cast from a global bounding sphere that's simply rotating a day and night texture over the game world. But in games like Star Citizen, No Man's Sky, and Astroneer, the day-night cycle is real. You're actually on a planet rotating and seeing a real sun. The weather plays a huge role in Sea of Thieves. Not only do storms look amazing, with lightning striking and reflecting on the ocean surface, but the gameplay is affected by it too, as players will find themselves having to bail out water from their ships to stay afloat. Tears of the Kingdom, when raining, will make it difficult to climb, as Link will keep slipping. He can also get struck by lightning if Link is holding metal weapons. Link isn't the only character who has to watch out for lightning. Rico from Just Cause 4 has to as well. But Avalanche Studios didn't stop with thunder. They also included dynamic tornadoes that roll across the world, picking up and throwing anything in their way. Tornadoes can also be found in Battlefield 42, and they look different depending on which map they're on. They push and pull trees and create an awesome effect when you walk near them. Rain in Death Stranding is called Timefall. It ages anything that it touches, including the items you're delivering. Red Dead 2 features realistic volumetric clouds that flow and fade through time. These clouds appear to be returning in GTA 6 based on the leaked footage. The effects from air and wind are visible in many games too, not only by blowing hanging clothes or trees, but in helicopter blades pushing water down in GTA 4, and apparently even in the vacuum of space. Snow and mud track in Red Dead 2 with the use of mud maps that memorize every step taken and every wheel's path rolled. Weather transitions in Red Dead 2 seamlessly, and water puddles in most Rockstar games when it's raining. Fog can be dense in a swamp, or eerie in the town of Silent Hill. Weather effects play a deeper role in video games than just looking cool. They create moods, shape environments, and enhance gameplay. Look at the graphics of this wallet in GTA 5. You can see it has a low quality texture, and it's also not comprised of very many polys. You could say that this wallet doesn't look very realistic. It also looks too bulky. There. That's much better, isn't it? Look at the simplistic design this wallet has, and the increased poly count. In fact, this wallet is just my real-world wallet 3D scanned into the scene. Ridge Wallets sent me this wallet while I was working on this video as part of this sponsorship. The cool thing about Ridge Wallets is that they come in so many different styles. If you like minimalistic wallets, you should take a look at their site and see how many options they have. You can even customize your own wallet and add your own text. They have custom options right now for the Father's Day sale. And if you're colorblind, don't worry, they've got other options too. You can get optional attachments like an AirTag holder, cash strap, or money clip. These wallets can hold up to 12 cards and can easily fit in your front pocket. This was important to me because I thought I had way too many cards, but apparently I'm only using it at half capacity. Ridge wallets are built using durable, premium materials like titanium, aluminum, and carbon fiber. They're currently doing a Father's Day 2024 sale, and they've got great discounts, up to 40% off of many of the items on their site. That's Ridge's key case. It's made unlocking my door a lot easier while I'm holding as many groceries as I can possibly fit in my arms. It has room for 1 to 6 keys, and it protects them and holds them in place. It also gets rid of that annoying jingle. Guys, I've wanted to have Ridge as a sponsor for the last few years, and it finally happened. These are the kinds of sponsors I really want to work with because they actually offer quality products. They have over 100,000 5-star reviews, and they offer returns for up to 99 days if you don't like the wallet, with no questions asked. They've also got a lifetime warranty if you're rough on your things. If you're interested in getting a wallet for yourself, or for your dad or your brother, please check the Ridge Wallet's website and take advantage of their up to 40% off sale. Use my link ridge.com/darkspace to get the deal and to let Ridge know I sent you. Water is a tricky thing to create for game developers. It has so many elements to it that it can make things complicated. For instance, water has to slosh around without looking like it's a repetitive pattern. That sloshing also has to react to the player's actions if it's to be realistic. It has to be somewhat transparent, allowing you to see what's below it, and you have to create a look for being under it. And that look has to feature caustics, those shiny, warping highlights swimming all over the ground. Caustics are the bright patterns you see when light passes through a glass of water and creates bright spots on the table. The light rays are being bent and concentrated to form these bright shapes. Water can also show God rays when looking at the surface from below. The transition between shifting through water and air has to look good too. Then, what kind of life is under the water? Do you have Call of Duty level fish AI? Water in Halo 2 was a flat shader, but water in Halo 3 was rendered as actual geometry. It reacted to the player as he walked through or drove through it. Bodies could even float in it and flow downstream. This is Halo 2 Original and Halo 2 Anniversary. You can see the difference caustics make. GTA 4 had similar water capabilities, as objects and debris could float on its surface. Frame rate can also affect the physics calculations for water in some games. Ripple effects in water are really cool, and they're done really well in Red Dead Redemption, Battlefront 2, and many other games. The best looking water I've seen in a game is from Sea of Thieves. That and the Batman Arkham City water. They both just look so real. Sea of Thieves proves that even games that aren't aiming for photorealism can still achieve stunningly realistic visuals, perfectly balancing art style on one hand and realism on the other. It's truly some
blue-ass water. Water that's way too blue. Yo, come check out how blue this water is. Look at this water. How blue is that? I've never even seen that shade of blue before.
It's so clean and vibrant, it looks like it belongs in a Gatorade commercial. In Ghost of Tsushima, splattered blood hitting the water catches and flows downstream. This kind of attention to detail is incredible. Miiverse user Mario Wii U would have given this a good review. Ghost of Tsushima also did an amazing job with the vegetation. The rolling grass flowing in the wind, the massive amount of grass on screen at once. Vegetation is also complicated, like water, if you consider how much of it you have to have and how it has to hide a grass texture on the ground underneath it. It also has to react to wind and to anything the player does to it. Driving a car or walking a horse through grass needs to push it down under it. Grass that reacts to the world is even better. In Zelda, you can cut it, catch it on fire, and have it react to the wind. Branches in Red Dead 2 move when you ride through on your horse. The LOD transitions for grass in Red Dead 2 might be the best in any video game. The distant hills are still packed with grass, and it's hard to see the transition into the nicer looking grass as you approach it. In the future, grass may leave tracks, like mud and snow do in Red Dead. Trees may finally be more than just solid, immovable objects. Maybe we'll even be able to cut them down like we can in Zelda Breath of the Wild. Lighting has come so far in gaming. We used to fake lighting with light maps, and now we can simulate it in real time. Lighting used to look pretty flat, as games like Spider-Man 2, GTA 3, and San Andreas didn't have real shadows. In GTA San Andreas, they simply put dark circles underneath the characters to fake a contact shadow. In 2024, games have nearly mastered the art of realistic lighting. With technologies like global illumination, dynamic radiosity techniques, and ray tracing, lighting has become nearly lifelike. Global illumination is a lighting technique that calculates not just direct light, but indirect light as well, meaning it calculates light bounces. Indirect lighting can turn a scene from looking like this, where the light does not bounce after it arrives at a surface, and turn it into this, a scene where light bounces off the floor in an enclosed environment, lighting the interior. This entire scene is now lit by indirect lighting. Another amazing thing that global illumination does is it adds color bleed. If I was to turn this back wall green, any light bouncing off of it would absorb some of that color too, filling the room with a green tint. A game that utilized color bleed and global illumination to the max was Mirror's Edge. Mirror's Edge did not simulate global illumination live, but rather it was baked into the world ahead of time. The use of these colors and color bleed was incredible. The city felt dystopian and thematic. Global illumination gives new life to game environments, especially in Mirror's Edge, where there's a huge emphasis on color. Halo Infinite's Forge mode also allows you to bake the lighting to make more realistic maps. But for a video game, how do we store this lighting information if an object moves? Let's say the wall here were to be destroyed. This is the challenge DICE was presented with when making Battlefield 3. Their problem was they needed to bake the lighting into the world, but the world is destructive, so it needed to dynamically adjust to the destruction. Their solution was to place light probes all throughout the world that each stored global illumination lighting information. Any objects passing through their light probe zone would only receive light based on that probe. These probes were stored in a grid. In this picture, their positions are represented as spheres. Fast forward to today, where we can simulate real global illumination live. Lumen is Unreal Engine 5's fully dynamic global illumination and reflection system. It simulates these effects in real time. Instead of having to bake in all the lighting effects ahead of time and creating a statically lit environment that's unchangeable, we can move lights, objects, and characters through the world and see the effect they have on the lighting and shadow conditions around them in real time. An object that's very orange, for instance, will radiate that color to surrounding objects. It does this in real time by generating inverted cube maps of every object in the scene, and using that inward-looking texture information on these cube maps to generate their light bounces. This allows surfaces that are hidden off-screen to still be reflective and affect the scene. This lumen scene is what lumen light rays see, and it can also be used to generate reflections too. RoboCop uses Lumen to light its levels, and these effects can be seen there. Lumen also handles real-time shadows realistically. Variable penumbra is a technique that adjusts the softness of a shadow based on its distance from the object casting that shadow. Lumen simulates this natural effect, and it helps to build on the realism the lighting system creates. Red Dead 2 also does this for shadows. The further away the shadow and the object are from each other, the blurrier the shadow edges are. GTA 6 appears to have real-time global illumination as well. It can be seen in Lucia's face as the light from her jumpsuit bleeds onto her face and the wall beside her as she turns around. It can be seen in the buildings on the shore shot too, as the sun bounces down the alleyway, slowly transitioning to shadow. Real-time global illumination is beautiful to look at and fun to play with. It should be a standard for AAA games moving forward. I'm sure everyone knows how ray tracing works by now, but the quick explanation is that every pixel you see casts a ray forward, and that ray bounces around the scene. The ray collects information on lighting and reflections. This allows for real-time reflections and global illumination. Ray-traced reflections are accurate and detailed. The coolest thing about ray-traced reflections are that they make it so your car actually reflects dynamic objects like blowing trees, other cars, pedestrians, and even yourself. Not only that, but you're no longer seeing what used to get projected on reflections, a low-detail version of the world from your perspective. Screen space reflections work differently. It simulates reflections based on the camera's view. That's why looking away from objects can cause their reflections to vanish. The edges of the screen can also have a weird artifact due to this. It also removes dynamic objects from the reflected content. GTA 6 looks like it will have real-time dynamic reflections as we've seen in the first trailer. Textures have advanced significantly since the old Nintendo 64 days. Thanks to this, every object, character, and world we encounter can look as detailed as developers want them to look. For example, compare Leon from Resident Evil 2 to its remake. Not only has he gotten more polygons to make up his character model, but the textures that make him up have become invisible thanks to their higher resolution. There is also more going on with these textures, but we'll cover that later in the PBR section. The game Rage exemplifies this advancement in textures by featuring a world with no repeating textures. Every wall, object, floor, and detail is uniquely crafted because the map is textured from a single, high-detailed megatexture. This impressive texture, making up 17 of the game's 20 GB size, showcases the potential of modern texturing techniques. ID Software also went on to make Doom, which also used megatextures. The problem with megatextures is that they suffer from pop-in, since the texture file is so massive. Unreal Engine created a system that can basically fix this, called Virtual Textures. It manages and renders larger textures efficiently by breaking them down into smaller tiles and only loading the necessary titles into memory. This allows for the use of extremely detailed textures without the performance hit typically associated with large texture files. It also blends separate textures automatically to make them look like they naturally belong together. It has a feature too where it dynamically tiles them, so it sort of shifts their tiling effect to not look so repetitive. In the future, Video games may no longer have to repeat and overuse the same textures all throughout the game world. Maybe every game will utilize mega textures, where each and every element is brand new and custom made specifically for that exact location, making the game world feel more organic and less repetitive. I think this is one of the coolest things done in a video game. Cloth simulation and physics have stitched together some incredible advancements, especially in games like Red Dead Redemption 2. The dynamic clothing movement when you walk or move is insane, with animated normal maps making horse muscles and characters' clothes appear to move realistically. Instead of static objects pretending to be hanging clothes, Red Dead 2 features simulated cloth that Arthur can interact with, whether by walking through it or awkwardly standing in it. Of course, while this looks good, we can't forget about how games always have that one cloth simulation that's so bad it's constantly fighting itself to stay in place, bouncing and flipping around, totally distracting you from the game. Or how the moment a game cuts to a scene with cloth simulations, suddenly they all plop into active simulation mode, like they got caught lacking. Kevin Spacey's appearance in Call of Duty Advanced Warfare in 2014 is great for the 10 fans he has. It set a high bar for realistic character modeling and facial animations. The game showcased incredible detail, but the Call of Duty franchise hasn't really advanced much further than that. COD Modern Warfare 3 has good-looking character faces, but they aren't necessarily photorealistic. They still obviously look like a video game. 3 years before Advanced Warfare, Team Bondi, a company by the way that has now eaten itself alive and ruined its relationship with Rockstar Games during development of LA Noire, used motion scan technology to record the actors' faces and have facial animations in LA Noire. This helped players to read the subtle expressions of suspects to determine their guilt.
You fuck young boys, Valdez. Are you a madman?
Unfortunately, most of the acting was pretty bad.
Your wife was brutally beaten with a socket wrench handle, then stomped to death. How do you think that looks, Jacob?
I was home in bed.
This is so much cooler than what I grew up with. What expression do you think Hagrid here is trying to convey? Today's games focus on making facial expressions and emotions even more natural and realistic. The PlayStation Spider-Man series is great at this. Character expressions are easy to read, and emotional scenes carry more weight because of this. The best faces I've seen in video games have to be the Matrix demo running in Unreal 5, Hellblade 2, or Death Stranding. These faces basically look real. Hellblade 2 uses metahuman technology, capable of capturing a performance with a phone and turning that performance into an ultra-realistic facial animation in minutes. Locally on a laptop, by the way, you can see detailed skin textures and subsurface scattering, a lighting technique where light penetrates the skin, scatters, and exits, absorbing some of that material within. This creates a natural reddish glow. You can see this effect in Red Dead 2 and GTA 6 as light passes through the character's ears. There will always be developers that don't have the budget, technical know-how, or drive to make games with good-looking characters and facial animations. Games like Mass Effect Andromeda and GTA the Definitive Edition. But there's more to realistic characters than just facial animation and lifelike reaction to lighting. Muscle movement and deformation add a layer of realism as seen in the newer Spider-Man games, where muscles move naturally under the skin, unlike the more static rigging of older games. Thanks to Mr. Red Rivers for uploading this comparison, you can see here that his thigh muscle is not popping out as it naturally would if you were to actually bend down into a position like that. It's a small detail that makes all the difference, as now characters don't look as static. They fake the muscle inside that moves these bodies. While it may not be as noticeable in Spider-Man, it's much more noticeable in Red Dead 2. It can be seen in the muscle movement of the horses as they walk. Hair and fur simulation is also key in creating graphically impressive characters, and it's been a difficulty for video games to get right. Red Dead 2 features growing beards and hair, and the hair in GTA 6 looks amazing too. Even back in 2015, Lara Croft's hair in Tomb Raider was impressive, and this was released in 2015, nearly 10 years ago. More recent titles like Horizon Forbidden West and FIFA 23 continue to make convincing hair. The fur on characters like Trico and the Colossi in Shadow of the Colossus are also gameplay defining, as you have to grab and pull on this hair to climb the beasts. Fur in Call of Duty Ghosts is another good character example, as the dog plays a huge role in the story, so the dog should look realistic. Eye movement and reflections add to the immersion, with characters who actually look around. rather than staring blankly forward. Because older games just used static image textures most of the time, they didn't really have eyes. We can see this by looking at Resident Evil 2 again. The difference real eyes make is huge, because as humans, it's one of the most important things we look at when we look at a character, unless we're still talking about Tomb Raider. Dynamic environmental effects on your character, like clothes getting wet in water or muddy in mud, makes characters feel more grounded in their world. 3D models used to look like this, but now they look like this. What's more amazing is Gran Turismo, in the short span of less than a year and a half, was able to upgrade the look of their cars to this degree. Now this is pod racing. 3D models have changed the way we think and interact with game worlds. The days of blocky, pixelated, low-poly designs are gone. According to PlayStation, the poly count for vehicles in PlayStation 1's Gran Turismo were a mere 300. The poly count in today's PlayStation 5 Gran Turismo 7 is 500,000. The difference is staggering, with the modern car showcasing smooth, detailed surfaces and intricate designs, including interiors, while the old cars were just fancy-looking cubes. In comparison, the fully detailed modeled versions of cars in GTA 5 are from 100 to 150,000 polys. What's even more impressive is how quickly advancements have been made. For instance, Gran Turismo 2 and Gran Turismo 3, released just a year and a half apart, show a significant leap in visual fidelity. The cars in Gran Turismo 3 appear much more realistic with better textures, lighting, and overall detail. You can see this comparison again with that Resident Evil comparison we made earlier. Look at the character model difference. Look how many polys he has on the left versus the right. Modeling in video games is always a balancing act between looks and performance. The more detailed a model, the greater the impact on performance. This is why games use a level of detail system, which stores less detailed versions of objects to swap them out as the player moves away. This allows for high visual detail up close while maintaining performance at a distance. Unreal Engine's nanite technology revolutionizes this by breaking down objects into tiny triangles and streaming only the necessary details for each frame. With nanite, games can have a virtually limitless poly count on screen. Remnant 2 uses nanite, resulting in highly detailed game worlds without sacrificing modeling detail. Epic's flagship game Fortnite also showcases nanite's capabilities, allowing objects to have intricate details up close. The detail can theoretically be infinite, enabling you to look at objects up close without seeing the polygons that make them up. But we've already talked about nanite in previous Future of Games videos. What's really exciting is nanite is also being tested for character models. This is exciting because nanite initially only worked with static meshes. This technology can potentially enable characters to have infinite geometric detail. This is what you're seeing now. In this footage provided to Digital Foundry from Dylan Brown, you can see infinite geometric detail no matter how close the camera gets to the character. This is currently showing a 3D noise effect warping across the character's body. A ridiculous amount of geometric data is being shown here, yet nanite is able to manage the LOD system seamlessly. Imagine, in the future, games that allow you to get shot and procedurally generate real 3D geometric damage to your armor. If you're playing as a robot, maybe pieces of your armor take damage and eventually fall off if they're detached. Characters in more adult games could take massive wounds in your character's body, akin to the damage a visit with Taco Bell could do. This balance of vertices, LOD management, and cutting-edge technology like nanite is what drives the incredible realism seen in modern video game vehicles, objects, characters, and game worlds. Dynamic particle effects are fundamental for video games, adding layers of realism, immersion, and most importantly, player feedback. Take explosions, for example. In GTA 5, the explosions were already impressive, but even with 10-year-old tech, the expanded and enhanced version upgraded to more realistic fire, smoke, and dust effects. Battlefield 4 might set one of the highest bars in terms of particle effects, with its stunning explosions and fire effects that react to the destructive environments. The nuke in Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered shows a huge field of smoke and debris flying at the camera. But explosions and debris are not the only ways particle effects take their form. Particle effects are essentially just animated image planes fundamental for depicting interactions in a game. They often lack depth and volume, being 2D animations that fade away over time. This can be seen, for instance, in Halo 3, where pausing the game and rotating around the effect reveals their flat nature. The effect only works in real time, and because the effect is always facing you. But whether it's the puff of smoke from a gunshot or the flaring energy from an explosion, these effects convey power, temperature, and impact. GTA 4's helicopter blades cause leaves to fly off trees, and wind in Ghost of Tsushima can bathe the scene in falling leaves. In Battlefield 2042, environmental effects like sandstorms add dynamic elements that can impact gameplay and cloud the player's vision. Control uses complex particle effects to create supernatural phenomena, adding depth to the narrative behind the game's story. A particle effect can have an interesting journey. They almost always spawn in and fade out. But sometimes, as they leave the world, they can also leave behind a decal. In the case of blood splatters, particle effects can spawn in blood flying through the air and create blood decals wherever they land. In Halo 4, they enhanced the way particle effects could be utilized by adding special death animations for Forerunner weapons. Call of Duty developers also pushed the limits of what was possible by making their fish particle system swim away when the player approached it. They used this as a selling point for their game.
And also added an AI system to it, so we have fish move out of the way when you get close to them.
They got made fun of by the community pretty badly. Particle effects play a huge role in providing the player feedback in video games. These effects are visual, providing immediate recognizable cues that help players to understand the consequences of their actions. For example, when a player shoots a weapon, particle effects such as muzzle flashes, smoke, and bullet impacts provide immediate visual feedback. This helps the player to understand that their shot has been fired and where it has landed. In games like Call of Duty or Battlefield, shooting an enemy will create a particle effect of blood or armor dings, letting you know the successfulness of your shot. Also, these games' realistic representation of explosions, fire, and debris flying through the air makes the combat experience more intense and believable. Particle effects also enhance the sense of interaction with the environment. In Red Dead 2, for instance, the snow particles move as the character trudges through the snow, the way water splashes as you ride through it, or how puffs of dirt and grass burst from under the horse's feet with each step. These subtle touches make the game world feel more dynamic and responsive to the player's presence and actions. In many games, particle effects are used to indicate damage taken. For example, blood splatters or red flashes on the screen can signal to the player that they are being hurt, prompting them to take cover or to use a health item. Similarly, healing effects may also be represented by soothing light particles, indicating that the player is recovering health. Particle effects also help depict special abilities and powers. In games like League of Legends, Overwatch, or Destiny, each character's unique abilities are often accompanied by distinct particle effects that helps players and their teammates recognize which abilities are being used. The future of particle effects lies in real, simulated interactions. For example, the voxel-based smoke and teardown provides a more tangible and persistent experience. This isn't just a 2D image of smoke that's soon to disappear. It's really simulated smoke. NVIDIA's PhysX technology showcased in Call of Duty Ghosts allowed for interactive smoke that players could run through. This level of interaction was groundbreaking for its time, and this was around the same time period that GTA 5 was first released. Now imagine, if you will, that Call of Duty Ghosts was the last Call of Duty game that had come out until now, and that the next Call of Duty game was finally revealed and it was scheduled to release in fall of 2025. Then you'd know how GTA fans feel right now. Imagine a game where every particle interacts with wind, gravity, and other environmental elements. Similar to Teardown's voxel approach, these particles wouldn't just be mere 2D images. They'd be real, physical particles reacting to the world around them. You could almost have a game like the Hell of Sand Falling game, where these particles are elements, each with actual elemental properties. Water could be sprayed onto dirt, making it become muddy. But these simulations would be more about physical realism in gaming than the graphical realism in gaming. Have you ever looked into the void of a video game? That area that's between content, but void of any of its own? In Halo 3, you'll see this effect by looking into areas that don't exist. I like it when games make me think I'm having an aneurysm. This repetitive mirroring effect is known as the Hall of Mirrors effect. It can be seen in many games. This is the result of the game trying to draw an image of what is technically nothing. The result is a repetition of surrounding pixels near the empty spot. In co-op mode on Halo 3, instead of displaying this hall of mirrors, it will actually show the other player's screen instead. A lot of modders use reshade mods to help make games look more realistic. Battlefront 1 from 2016 looks nearly photorealistic with Martin Bergman's reshade, Toddyhancer. This gameplay is 10 years old. If one single person can make realistic graphics with reshade tools, there's no doubt that developers could do tenfold towards realism. The reason they don't most of the time is probably because they're trying to maintain a specific art style. When you have mods like Dreampunk that essentially just look like real-life footage, you have to question why game studios don't do this themselves. In 2021, a group put out their research on how they were able to use AI to alter every frame from GTA 5 to look more realistic. It was trained on the Cityscapes dataset, which is a collection of footage from streets in Germany and Central Europe. So the game's new look maintains the green tint the original footage had. It also forested the hill in the background, because the reality it was trained on doesn't know dried desert hills and mountains exist. So it replaced it with its own idea of reality. Consider the potential future here. If a model is trained on an art style rather than a real-world dashcam footage set, it could translate everything you see on your screen into something of a specific chosen art style. In other words, you can make any game, like GTA 5, look like anything else, like Minecraft. You could have a real-life model, a Mario-themed model, a cel-shaded cartoony model. The options would be limitless. Nerf and Gaussian Splatting are similar technologies that basically transform sets of real-world images that are focused on an area into 3D replicas of those subjects. They each do some incredibly complicated things, but ultimately, technologies like this can be used to create hyper-realistic objects and game worlds. In Unrecord, the game's camera perspective is not from the character's eyes. Instead, it mimics actual body cam footage. The jarring animation movement, the exposure adjustments, lighting, hand movement, and more all work together to create probably the most convincing realistic video game footage I've seen since GTA Definitive Edition. There are a few breaks in the illusion, like when this hand clips through the gun, or when this screen space reflection disappears as the reflected object is obstructed, which is good because that proves this actually a game and not real-life footage. It's scary when the developer has to convince the player something is fake, rather than trying to convince them it's real. The body cam game comes close to achieving this look, but not quite like Unrecord. If you're curious about whether or not Unrecord is actually coming out, they posted a tweet that updated the community saying that they want to keep everything under wraps because people are already trying to copy their work, and that they say what they've already shown barely scratches the surface of the game mechanics they're bringing. I saw some footage of a car chase scene, but I don't really know if it's legit, so I'm not going to show it, or if they even want it to be shown, so I won't show it. But it looked realistic. Why is it that cutscenes in older games always looked so much better than the game? Then the load screen would kick in and we came out of it looking like the We Got Spider-Man at Home version of the game. Those cutscenes always looked so good too. I used to wonder if games could ever look that good for real. And now, we're at a point where those pre-rendered cutscenes of the early 2000s don't even compare to our real-time graphics running at 60 FPS now. In fact, games don't even have to bother with pre-rendered cutscenes anymore. The graphics are good enough to just run the cutscenes in-game. Graphical realism has reached a point where it can appear almost indistinguishable from real life. A game that looks realistic and allows you to do anything, like GTA, could spark a worldwide debate among politicians and newscasters as to the psychological and moral implications of such lifelike realism.
Plenty of research out there which shows a link between violent video games and aggression.
Are they going to become violent just by playing Grand Auto Theft and Halo and these games?
We haven't gotten into the why. Okay, we know the individual was also into cyber gaming.
Cyber gaming, yes.
Well, do violent video games cause violence?
One of the most notable examples of something like this is the game on record. The question arises, what effect would playing a shooter game with ultra-realistic graphics have on a person, especially a child? If people are already concerned that video games contribute to real-world violence, though I personally disagree with that notion, these concerns might escalate as games become even more lifelike. The argument could be made by some that the immersive nature of these games could blur the lines between fantasy and reality, potentially influencing behavior and desensitizing players to violence. Consider this thought: are there any moral boundaries that should not be crossed in video games? I'm talking about video games as they are now. Obviously, this mission in GTA 5 is pretty tame by the community standards. So was this mission in Call of Duty. Shooting people in a video game, in my opinion, doesn't matter at all. It's a video game. They're not real, and I'm not simulating the real act in my head by doing these missions or messing around in free roam. But the idea is a little deeper here. Is it morally acceptable to engage in particularly evil acts of violence in a game? Say, forcing a character to do something dark against their will, if you catch my drift? Or the fact that there are no kids in GTA for a reason? If you'd say things could be taken too far in video games depending on the type of content being simulated, then you'd be saying that there are boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. In the same way, could a simple team deathmatch featuring typical PvP shooter combat be crossing a boundary if the graphics look like real life? Does the introduction of real life graphics cause us to rethink the ethics of violent gameplay that has become such commonplace in gaming? It makes me wonder whether video game companies might intentionally avoid achieving real life quality graphics to sidestep potential lawsuits and questions against their ethics. The fear being that with ultra realistic graphics, games might be held to higher standards of scrutiny that may not be worthwhile for a video game company to get involved in. Is there a line that needs to be drawn? Are realistic graphics a wise pursuit to begin with? That's not for me to decide, I'm just making a video here. The future and past collide in Daniel Schroeder's, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, custom renderer, inspired by Doom and Quake. According to the description of his video and his blog post, he's making a custom renderer that uses very small voxels to create detailed, stylized environments. He wanted to modernize the retro look of games like Doom and Quake, where pixelated textures give surfaces a blocky appearance up close. Now, surfaces have blocky three-dimensional details, voxels. The result has a foot in both worlds between retro 3D graphics and something much more modern. He's turning voxels into displacement maps. Imagine if the next Minecraft was like this, or if a first-person multiplayer shooter used this and the environment was destructive. This is what the future and past look like when they come together. If you want to skip this complicated technology portion of the video, please just skip to the time on screen now. In this section, I'm just explaining what a game like GTA 5 does in every frame to create the images you see when playing. I also go through how material textures work in video games, and some common game graphics settings that just look like a bunch of letters jammed together when you're trying to choose the right graphics setting in your game. If you want to skip to the part about corporate greed and creative bankruptcy, you can do that now. If not, how do you think video games render each frame? In making this video, I learned that games do a lot more than I originally thought they ever did. Video games render each frame you see in either one of two ways, and sometimes a combination of the two is used. Number 1, forward rendering, or number 2, deferred shading. For this video, we're only going to talk about deferred shading, but simply put, forward rendering is a graphics technique where each object is rendered individually with all lighting calculations performed per light per object. This creates wasted work after calculations are pointlessly made for objects that end up getting covered anyways. It also has challenges when multiple lights are present. GTA 5 and Red Dead 2 use deferred shading. Shrek for the Xbox, released in 2001, was the first commercial game to use deferred shading. In this deferred shading process, each frame goes through an extremely complicated rendering process before you even get to see it. Before we look at the process each frame goes through, consider the fact that each one of these frames is calculated in 16 milliseconds if you're playing at 60 frames per second, because 1000 milliseconds divided by 60 is 16. Basically, all 60 frames you see every second are each going through this intricate operation. The first optional step for a frame for games like GTA 5 or Zelda Breath of the Wild is that it generates an environmental cube map that it will use for reflections. This cube map scan is blind to dynamic objects. This is why reflections that are using cube maps do not display other cars or pedestrians. This step is generally an expensive operation that many engines cannot afford, in which case they can instead use pre-calculated cube maps generated offline at a different location of the scene. These are also called probes. After this, the game begins generating the G-buffer frames. Rather than just sending the object through the rendering pipeline, as is done with forward rendering, where it would include heavy and costly lighting calculations for each light and object, the game creates several buffers, and every buffer contains one type of attribute of a vertex. This process starts by rendering out the mesh visible in the scene. The advantage is the pixels contain the information of the closest object to the camera, enabling it to prevent the calculations that would have otherwise been made for objects that ended up hidden behind other objects. At this stage, it does not calculate any lighting, but instead it creates multiple different layers of images, each with their own information that the render pipeline will use later. Let's look at these various G-buffer layers that are created and the information each layer stores. The albedo map, a flat color version of the scene with no effect from lighting. You could consider this layer the base layer for all other effects like lighting to adjust and alter. Normal map. The normal map stores information for surface details like grooves, bumps, and scratches that will be used during the lighting process. This information will ultimately make the world appear to have more layers and depth. By using this information to alter the behavior of light and parallax over surfaces without actually adding geometry. Specular map stores information on how shiny surfaces are. Depth map. The depth map stores depth information in a single frame that the pipeline can then use to understand how far away things are. Each pixel on this gradient stores distance information from the camera to the object of whatever object that pixel is representing, with the gradient value communicating distance amount. In the case of GTA 5, the darker something is, the further away it is. The depth map is created front to back. By doing it this way, it can save work by using a technique called early Z rejection, which basically calculates the depth for 2 pixels, compares them, throws away the distant pixel, and cancels lighting operations on a pixel that is blocked or obstructed as it works its way out. It will use this depth information to calculate lighting. Irradiance map. This layer contains information on how much irradiance each pixel receives from light. In Red Dead, another layer is created, the screen space velocity pass. This layer stores information on which areas in the scene are moving quickly. This allows object-specific motion blur. A reflection map is drawn and flipped for the water surfaces to reflect. A screen space ambient occlusion layer is drawn. It darkens areas like holes and creases and intersections that are close together. Areas like this can block out ambient light, making them appear darker. Finally, all of these various layers, collectively known as the G-buffer, are ready to be combined. The game uses this data to calculate shadows and other lighting effects in a single pass, making the process efficient even with multiple light sources. The light pass is calculated within a projected 3D space derived from the 2D buffer images. The light is being simulated within a 3D interpretation of 2D images that contain depth information. Each light renders its own geometry, and the light affects only the pixels within the range of the light. This is contrary to forward rendering that iterates over all lights for each pixel. Utilizing the depth map, it can also save on costly lighting computations on pixels that end up being hidden by closer pixels anyways. For each light source, a mesh is drawn. The mesh is not textured. The goal is just to touch all the pixels inside the light halo for the lighting to be carried out within. It will dynamically calculate the lighting depending on the pixel depth, its distance from the light source, and its other properties. There are even more steps that occur after this, like subsurface scattering for the skin to appear more lifelike, fog, minimap, or really anything user interface related, post effects, and more. This is why guns in Call of Duty or Halo don't clip through walls when you get close to them. They are essentially a user interface layer that is rendered on top of the final render the game world delivers. Generally speaking, and leaving out tons of details that would probably just bore you, and I'm not smart enough to describe, that's how each frame is drawn. Deferred shading separates geometry and lighting calculations, enabling complex lighting without the need for multiple passes per light source. source, unlike forward rendering. This method, however, is not perfect, as many people who are much smarter than me have made the case. Deferred shading struggles with transparent objects because the G-buffer cannot work with transparent objects. The pipeline has to work a forward rendering method at some point on top of all this to take care of transparent items. This can lead to visual artifacts or requires additional passes. In GTA 5, you cannot see cracked glass textures through another piece of glass due to limitations in handling transparency in deferred shading. Deferred shading is just one of the ways video games render frames. For instance, unlike deferred shading, forward rendering calculates light for each object as it's rendered. This can be less efficient with many light sources, but handles transparent objects better. Each light also has to calculate individually for every object every single frame. For more information on G-buffers in GTA and Red Dead, please check the description to read Adrian's blog posts on the topic. There you can also find a link to support his work. I want to thank Adrian, Papatom2, and Etay for proofreading this section and helping me to get it more accurate. Etay also has a YouTube channel which I've linked in the description for people interested in implementing 3D graphics in OpenGL or Vulkan. His channel is OGLDEV and it's in the description. Please check him out if that interests you. I also want to thank Adrian for making this blog post that explains this whole confusing topic. Textures are images in video games that make up every single object you see. If you just stuck a simple image on this object, however, it would look flat. It wouldn't react to lighting in any interesting way. This is where PBR comes into play. PBR stands for physically based rendering. It's a method of shading and rendering that provides a more accurate representation of how light interacts with material properties. It's just a set of various images, like the deferred shading G-buffer, that contain different information for the renderer to look at. Here's those layers. The albedo. This layer represents the color in the texture. It should be flat looking, with no bright or dark spots. It's a neutrally lit texture. Normal. A normal map is a type of bump map. It basically tells the shader what direction the normals are facing for lighting calculations, which can be used to simulate detail on the surface without actually adding more geometry. If you look at a normal mapped surface edge on, the illusion is broken because you can see that it is, in reality, just flat. Normal mapping is very fast. In terms of the texture itself, normal maps use the red, green, and blue channels to tell the shader what direction the normals are pointing in. Parallax occlusion mapping is a technique similar to normal mapping. However, it accounts for the angle of the viewer relative to the surface normal when displacing the texture coordinates. Therefore, at steeper viewing angles, the texture coordinates are displaced by a higher degree. They use this in Red Dead 2. Height displacement. Displacement maps are different. They are used to actually modify the surface of an object. If you look at the silhouette of a displaced map object, you will see that the surface is actually changed and the detail is real. Displacement maps are usually grayscale and describe the height that the surface should be displaced to. It's not faking it, black being the lowest and white being the highest. Displacement mapping is more realistic, yet much more costly. In a PBR workflow, displacement maps can provide the highest level of realism because they change the model's geometry to produce true depth and shadowing effects. Displacement can also be used in nanite. Roughness. How rough or smooth the object is. It also adjusts how sharp or blurry a reflection looks through the object. Metallic. The metallic texture usually has parts that are completely black or completely white, and they are used to tell the renderer what parts of the object are metal, as metal areas behave differently than non-metallic areas. Emissive. An emissive map allows some areas of the object, based on the texture, to radiate light. For example, these are used for windows at night for games like GTA 5. It makes it look like the lights are on. They glow and they cast their own light. DLSS stands for Deep Learning Supersampling, and it's used to upscale lower resolutions into higher resolutions, without the cost that would come with natively running them at those higher resolutions. Basically, you see a higher resolution, but the game is really playing in a lower resolution, and DLSS is up-resing each frame while it's making it. High dynamic range rendering allows for a broader range of color and brightness values, creating more realistic and vibrant visuals. It enhances the contrast between bright and dark areas. This is why your display has to be capable of utilizing this feature in order to activate it. Anti-Aliasing. Anti-Aliasing techniques are used to smooth jagged edges in graphics. High-quality anti-aliasing methods contribute to a cleaner and more realistic visual appearance, but many people also do not like anti-aliasing downsides, like blurry-looking imaging, ghosting effects, and more. FXAA, TAA, and MSAA all have the same purpose, but they achieve their results differently. SSAO. Screen space ambient occlusion is a computer graphics technique that approximates ambient occlusion in real time. It's an image post-processing effect that darkens areas like holes, creases, and surfaces that are close together. Tessellation. Tessellation is a method of subdividing a model into multiple triangles. It involves splitting a triangle into multiple smaller triangles and placing them in the same location as the original triangle. When you have a displacement map invoked, it can then utilize this extra geometry that has been invented, and it can displace that geometry with the map of the displacement texture. Our society has hit a point of creative bankruptcy. Every movie that gets released seems to be either a sequel, a remake, a reboot, or an adaptation from a book. The video game industry is no different. Game companies have IP mined their content to death. Halo 1 Anniversary, Halo 2 Anniversary, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, Island, Prime, Mafia Definitive, The Colossus, Star Wars Battlefront Classic Edition, Bandicoot, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, and plenty more have all been brought back from the dead and resold to nostalgia-driven fans. I'm not against any of these games being remade, by the way, except for GTA Definitive Edition. In fact, I love that a new generation of gamers gets to play these games with graphics they're accustomed to. Plus, it's awesome to see a game faithfully updated to today's graphical standards, where the art style is not lost and the developers respect the original vision and intentions. It's also awesome to see mobile game developers vandalize art styles and completely miss the mark on what made the originals so loved. I'm just making the point that these huge game companies have found a way that they can update and resell what content and games already worked for them in the past. But if we keep living in the past, we won't see much innovation in gaming. We're just reliving the rush we got from those older days, when we were experiencing actual innovation. Now we're just going through the motions on repeat with prettier coats of paint. This isn't true innovation, it's stagnation. Huge game companies have found that graphics impress us, and graphics are easier than innovating, so they may as well just keep on selling us pretty games that we've already played. It doesn't end with remakes and remasters, it's in everything. This incessant need to show the most amazing graphics to us, even if that means blatantly lying to us just to get us to pre-order or consider buying their game. Ubisoft consistently advertised graphics they never deliver, or when we get pre-rendered CGI trailers for games that do nothing to show us why we should buy that game. For games like Wolverine, it makes sense. The developer wants to tease the project when they don't actually have a game yet, and they also want to bring talent in by means of that CGI trailer. Talent who, by means of that CGI trailer, can see the vision for the game and join their team. It doesn't make much sense for Assassin's Creed, who already has gameplay ready, is releasing in 6 months, opened up pre-orders, and still went ahead and showed a big over-elaborate CGI trailer. Rockstar Games is one of the only companies that seems to under-deliver with their trailers. Their games end up actually looking better than what was advertised. Red Dead 2 and GTA 5 are great examples of this. Watch the trailers, then play your copy of the game. Your game will look either the same or better. On top of all of this, these new consoles feature fidelity modes and performance modes. These next-gen consoles have to sacrifice a lot to output 60 FPS, including certain effects and resolution. The box is playing you. 8K, 4K, 120 FPS HDR? Find a game that has a fidelity mode with ray tracing enabled, hitting 120 FPS at 4K on the PS5, and I'll pin it in the comments. I actually can't pin your comment because I'm contractually obligated to only pin Ridge's comment. Good graphics sell. I just wished good games did too. What changed in the 5th console generation to the 7th console generation that we're not seeing in the shift from the 7th to the 9th? Could it be that they are purposely keeping graphics where they are to slowly milk out the most amount of money for the least amount of work? Look at these 4 racing games. Can you tell me which is which? Can you tell me what year each one was released? The oldest and newest game on screen are now 10 years apart. Let's look at the innovation we used to see. Can you see a noticeable difference now? The differences are obviously massive. Graphics have truly leaped ahead, and for the past decade, they've settled. If there's any game genre that should be innovating in graphics, it's sports games. Madden and NBA 2K should look real by now. I mean, geesh, they don't upgrade any other aspect of the game each year, they just charge more than most other games with actual experiences to offer. Nothing changes, no new features are added. In fact, a lot of the time they're just downgraded. Their voice acting is atrocious.
Who have thought?
About what?
That a young buck like you could actually do the right thing and avoid getting his sorry butt kicked out the game. Sounds like a wise fella to win in this league. You need all hands on deck. Good call.
And their in-game stores are just gambling casinos. The least they could do is take half of the development team off the card packs and put them onto making the game look more realistic. But sports games fans have no self-respect, and Take-Two and EA know that.
Hey listen man, these Tuesday packs get crazier and crazier. Yeah, let's go buy some VC. 450k VC has been secured. I'm hoping we're not gonna need more than that today, but it's likely we're probably still gonna go to 1 million. Tyler Hero. Unless he had a hero card. Oh, and it's holographic!
Hey pal, you just blowing from Stupid Town?
Do realistic graphics matter? To some, graphics are all that matters, but for something to qualify as a video game, it has to be a game. You can have a good game with bad graphics. You can have a good game with a bad story. But can you have a good game with bad gameplay? A game that's horrible to play, may look great and have a good story too, doesn't really feel much like a game anymore. It feels more like a movie or a tech demo. Gameplay is the central most important element for a video game. When did games become movies? We're supposed to play them, not just watch them. Some games may be built to be enjoyable to watch too, and some people do enjoy just watching games being played by others, and to those freaks, yes, graphics are more important than gameplay. But for the most part, graphics should take a backseat to gameplay and story. That way, the ride is more fun and enjoyable. After all, gameplay matters most in a game. When graphics take the wheel, you'll take the scenic route, sure. But you may start asking, are we there yet? Graphics without gameplay is nothing more than a tech demo, a 6-hour QuickTime event. That's not to say that graphics don't matter. Graphics do matter. There is beauty in graphics. We spend hours lost in these worlds, talking to characters, interacting with environments, immersing ourselves in other realities. We connect to these worlds because they mimic our own so well. And it's thanks to the many hardworking developers that slave over these technologies, optimizing and revolutionizing them year after year, all to convince us, the player, that the worlds we're entering are worth believing in. Graphics are there to fit the tone of the game. It's not always about realism. Sometimes it's about how beautiful it is to look at, or just how much what you're seeing immerses you into feeling the intended feeling and emotion the developer is trying to elicit from you. Photorealism isn't the end game. It's not the future. The future of graphics is told in each game, in each and every one of its own stories. We're capable of photorealism right now, but we're not necessarily pursuing it. We're pursuing artistic vision. Aesthetic styles like Battlefield mirror our world, but in a video gamey way. GTA 6 does this too, but it's not trying to look like real life. It's just trying to look like a version of our world that's believable enough to play around in. How realistic do you want it to look when you're running dozens of pedestrians over? Don't answer that. Or, how realistic do you want it to look when you visit the strip club? You can answer that. The game that has sold the most copies in history is Minecraft, a game that features a simple 16-bit pixel graphics art style. Art style is important. This is why Nintendo is so successful. This is why comic book stories like Spider-Man can pop out of the page and onto our screen to interact with. This is how we get stories and journeys that bring us through rainbow roads, dystopian futuristic cities as a cat, entire galaxies, backyards, and front yards. This is how we get to experience falling with style, transformable walking mechs, spawning any item that we can spell, being a pirate, fighting robots with a guitar to the beat. This is how we meet characters like Trico, Clementine, Spyro, and Claptrap. This is how we reach the full potential of video game graphics. Not always by just copying our own world, but by creating new ones. Stylized art styles break the conventional, realistic graphics mold, and they stand the test of time for doing so. These art styles are always fun to see unless you're the definitive edition. The games that do stylized art graphics right can't be dated. Even though some of these games are old, they look awesome. Graphics don't have to be good to be good. if that makes sense. I love how Spider-Man on PS1 looks. I love how Spyro looks. These older games may have bad graphics, sure, but they're charming, in a my kid's first drawing kind of way. They hold a special place in your heart. Other parents or today's gamers maybe just wouldn't get it. Sure, the eyes are a little droopy and the lines are inconsistent and they threw color theory out the window, but the point is, it looks beautiful to you, and that's what matters. Gamers have been playing games back when they were just text interactions and 2D sprites. Each graphical leap blew our minds. With each advancement, we thought it couldn't get any better. Then, at a certain point, we were right. We reached near photorealism, and some games have even achieved it. With that, consoles began seeking out new things to promote, like frame rates, HDR, resolutions, and more. So what's next? 8K? 16K? The future of graphics and gaming can only ever go so far. Photorealism. And if every single game looked like real life, what would set them apart from each other? What is the future of graphics in video games? It's whatever we want it to be.
Finally tonight, the latest video game craze to sweep the United States and Japan. It's called...
There's been a lot of discussion recently about when the next generation of video games begins. It begins right now. And you just saw it with your very own eyes.
Killer graphics.
Are they going to become violent just by playing grand auto theft and Halo in these games?
Video games lead to violence.
Violent video games increase aggressive behavior.
Just by playing these games?
Now, of course, the HD era is about high-definition graphics, and unbelievable sound, and unbelievable graphics, and unbelievable video games, and unbelievable titles.
Aggressive behavior.
These video games, to me, are murder simulators.